We have on the line in the studios Miss Regina Carter here on The Voice of the Arts. She's coming to Spivey Hall this weekend on Saturday to play a concert with her quartet. How you doing today, Regina?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's been fun reading up about you in preparation for this interview, and I feel like there's so much to talk about, but something that jumped out to me right off the bat was how early you got started in the musical world, and how it seems like you kind of had no chance but to be a musician. You started studying piano before violin. Maybe we could talk about the transition, and there obviously was something there that must have made the violin feel right.
I have two older brothers, and they were taking piano lessons, and I would hear them practicing all the time. And I walked up to the piano one day and started playing one of the tunes that one brother was working on while their piano teacher was there, and they were all shocked. And she said, the teacher said, who taught her that? And they said, no one. We didn't even know Regina could play. So she tested me and told my mom I had a gift to be able to hear and repeat music back. So I started with piano, but I didn't stick with the piano. My teacher at the time, Anna Love in Detroit, felt like, because I used to like to create my own songs, compose my own songs, and she didn't want me to lose that joy of creating. So she told my mother to wait till I was older, and then Suzuki for strings, the Suzuki method was being offered, and Ms. Love called my mother and said this would be perfect because in Suzuki you learn to play by ear first. And I went in, and I was given the violin at first. I fell in love with it. We were given an opportunity later to try other stringed instruments, but I stuck with the violin. And I love playing and being on stage. And my mom said I was always a ham, so I guess it's a perfect job for me.
And you've studied a whole lot coming from Detroit, but what also jumped out to me was that you studied under Isaac Perlman.
Yeah, I had a couple of master classes with Isaac Perlman and with Yehudi Menuhin. My classes with Isaac, I was pretty young, but when I was 16, my quartet had a master class with Yehudi Menuhin, and I remember my teacher at the time always had an issue with me wanting to play jazz and other music, and he told Yehudi Menuhin, yeah, she wants to play jazz, and she's going to ruin her career, and Mr. Menuhin picked up his violin and played a little blues lick and said, leave her alone. So I was forever grateful to him for that. Just seeing someone of his stature, knowing that it's all music. There's only two kinds of music, good music and bad music. So that was a great moment.
Well, talking about good music, there's been a whole lot of good music that's come out of Detroit, and I can't help but wonder how that has influenced you as a player. But I guess instead of just, asking you who your influences were, I'm kind of curious, later in life, once you've been involved in music for so long and been a professional musician, were there things that surprised you that you realized later on were a product of your environment?
Growing up, first of all, in Detroit, when I grew up there, it was a very diverse city and the neighboring cities. And so I was exposed to a lot of different cultures and sounds at a very young age without having to leave the country. And I was very enamored with a lot of those sounds, and I was always very curious. And so I think a lot of that exposure helped me to seek out that music and to become familiar with it and to incorporate a lot of it in what I do. I'm very curious. I'm always searching for new sounds and well, they're not new sounds, but they'd be new to me, and other cultures, and understanding it, and having the chance to perform around the world and meet people and be exposed to these sounds firsthand, it has always been intriguing to me. So I really feel fortunate that I grew up in Detroit. My mom took me to the symphony every week. I had older brothers that were listening to Motown and the Beatles, and then when I discovered jazz, or jazz discovered me, we lived a mile away from Baker's Keyboard Lounge, and so I got to hear, my mom would take me up to hear a lot of the great jazz musicians passing through Detroit.
I'm always blown away by what goes into making a violin and how there are legendary violins out there. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, I was reading that you went and played in Genoa on a very special violin for a 9/11 tribute concert.
It was Paganini's violin, actually, and it's made by Guarneri, and it's called the Il Canone, which is the canon, and they nicknamed the violin the canon because it's such a powerful sound and a very deep sound. And Paganini was an amazing violinist, and it was said that he'd made a pact with the devil because he could play all these ridiculous lines on the instrument, and they said he was a big showman. He'd break strings on the violin and play a whole piece on one or two strings. So he was definitely a showman. But this violin, usually European classical musicians enter into a competition playing his pieces. Whoever wins, they get to play a concert and do a recording with this violin. But a friend of mine who lives in Genoa thought it would be a great idea for me to play a concert with some arrangements that the bassist John Clayton had written for me for jazz pieces. And he had the idea while he was here, and he left, and next day 9/11 happened. And so we decided to make it a tribute concert, and we raised some money and donated it to, I picked Doctors Without Borders. But it was a really beautiful concert, and we called it a night of healing. And after that concert, they allowed me to record Paganini After a Dream, which is the next record, using Paganini's violin. I had to do it in Genoa because they didn't allow the violin to travel after 9/11 for quite some time. And then fast forward about 4 years later, Genoa was elected the cultural capital of Europe. And so they flew the violin here to New York. It was a big deal. The police escorted it off the airplane, and I played a sold-out concert here in New York using that violin. So it was a very amazing time in my musical life.
That is fascinating to think about. That's I'm a painter myself, and that's like getting to use, Van Gogh's brushes or something like that. I can't imagine. Yeah. You definitely are all over the board in your influences and style, but you are big on improvisation. I kind of wanted to talk for a little bit about what happens when you're improvising. Lots of artists speak about how their artwork kind of flows through them. It's not necessarily a product of their actions. Do you get that feeling when you're playing and you're in a good improvisation that you're kind of a conduit?
Yes, definitely. I feel like it's not from me, but it's coming through me. And when we really have that magical moment, the whole band seems to meet in a place. It's almost, I think, when people say they have a spiritual high or they get happy in church or whatever, you feel like you leave your body, but you all communicate in another space. And when it happens, we all know that we were there because unplanned things happened, and they happen on stage. And then when you try the next day, of course, you want that to happen again. You can't force it; it just happens. And you try and make those things happen, and it doesn't work. So those moments don't happen often, but when they do, they're extremely moving and beautiful, and the audience feels it as well.
Who are you going to be playing with on Saturday?
I'm bringing Xavier Davis on piano, Jesse Murphy on bass, Alvester Garnett on drums, and I'll be playing violin.
It's a beautiful concert hall at Spivey Hall, and that's this Saturday, January 25th at 8:15. Miss Regina Carter and her quartet. Regina, thanks so much for being on The Voice of the Arts.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to playing there.